Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Continuing Education, SOCE, Diploma Postgraduate Diploma Programs, Postgraduate Diploma Program in Rural Development, PGDRD, Revised, Compulsory Course, MRD, 201 Rural Development, Indian Context, Block-1 Rural Society, Unit-3 Rural Economy, 3.0 Objectives. After reading this lesson you will be able to times define rural economy of India, times analyze contribution, composition and structural changes of rural economy of India, times know status of rural physical resources, times talk right about the current status of rural economy in India. 3.1 Introduction. India has been primarily an agricultural nation, with two-thirds of its population still living in rural areas. With a population of over 1.3 billion, it is said that real India lives in her villages. These villages in the rural regions of India are the home of India's 70% population. India's rural areas show their different cultures, customs, languages spoken and dialects used as one travels through various states of India. Even within a state, one can find diverse cultures, traditions, languages spoken and idioms used. These customs, cultures, languages, and dialects reflect real India and give it a distinct identity across the world. The rural growth and development drive India's overall growth and evolution as India's rural economy constitutes about 50% of India's national income. 3.2 Concept of rural economy in India. The rural economy of India has continuously been promoting and contributing to the economy of India. Studies indicate that even though there was a downturn in India's overall economy, India's rural economy still showed growth and support to the economy of the country at difficult times. Thus, the rural economy of India is the bedrock of the Indian economy. India would continue to be a rural country in the time to come as 50% of its population is estimated to be living in rural areas till the year 2050. India, work remain are agriculture based enough in the future. India's overall growth and prosperity will mainly be driven by the growth and development of rural areas and the growth of its population. The Indian economy is based on its rural economy and agriculture's productivity. More than 60% of its population is still engaged in agricultural activities for livelihood and survival. The contribution of agriculture to the Indian economy has been of considerable significance. Many scholars and analysts have highlighted the importance of agriculture in the Indian economy. However, there has been a steady change in India's rural economy from agricultural to non-agricultural activities. Rural India has witnessed the development of non-farm income in recent times. It has seen residents in rural areas resorting to alternative job opportunities. This change is mainly triggered by the lack of modern methods of agriculture, below subsistence level of production in many areas, growing education and knowledge among the rural population, and seasonal unemployment in the agriculture field. Moreover, the rural youth, which is more educated and knowledgeable, aspires to jobs that suit their skills and expertise. They are reluctant to pursue their forefathers' footsteps as they don't see a bright future in agriculture. A significant finding by Niti Aayog is that the fall in the agricultural productivity is mainly because the younger generation abandoning agriculture and absorbing into other sectors of work. And as such, they do not return to agriculture. The rural female workers could not work in the farm sector. This phenomenon is more common among young male and female workers. In such a situations, India's agriculture and allied industry being a significant player in the Indian economy, has adversity affected the overall growth of the economy? 3.3 Contribution of rural areas in Indian economy. By 2025, the Indian economy is expected to turn into a $5 trillion economy. The Indian economy is reportedly to be $2.94 trillion, the fifth highest in the world. It is expected that by 2025, the Indian economy could develop into a $5 trillion economy. Many analysts and institutions are also promoting this potential of the Indian economy. The Indian Economic Survey 2019-20 reveals that the Indian economy will become a $5 trillion plus economy by 2025. India's rural economy's role is of utmost importance in making the Indian economy a $5 trillion economy. In developing the Indian economy into a $5 trillion economy, the rural economy will play a significant role. India's government sees contributions from agriculture of $1 trillion, services of $3 trillion, and manufacturing of $1 trillion as rendering the Indian economy a $5 trillion economy. Therefore, agriculture attracts attention. As mentioned above, agriculture is the backbone of the Indian economy, provided that the Indian economy remains predominantly agricultural. It creates jobs for more than 60% of people in India and thus makes a significant contribution to Indian national income. Agriculture has over time proven to be important to the Indian economy. There have been several initiatives and policy measures taken by the government to raise agricultural production and improve the lives of those employed in this sector. Over the years, agriculture has made a remarkable contribution to the Indian economy. The most significant proportion of population of India is directly or indirectly engaged in agriculture for as compared to other fields. India's rural economy generates more than half of the country's revenue, and rural areas employ roughly two-thirds of the population as per estimate of Niti Aayog in 2017. The Aayog wonders more by discovering that rural regions contribute more than half of India's manufacturing sector. In 2018, the Indian Chamber of Food and Agriculture, ICFA, which explores the development of agriculture and Indian farmers over the last 70 years, starting from the Indian Food and Agriculture Council's independence, emphasizes rural and agricultural economy's role in the degree of job creation in agriculture. In its study, the ICFA found that more than 60% of workers work in agriculture. The report further describes the importance of agriculture in maintaining the nation's food security. To raise agricultural production and enhance the status of Indian farmers, the Government of India has declared that farmers' income will be doubled by 2022. However, India's rural employment has shifted from agricultural to non-agricultural operations in recent years, and rural India's non-farm incomes have increased. The Economic Survey of India has also noted the same pattern. People in rural areas have had access to new job opportunities. It has been observed that the gross domestic product originating in the agriculture and allied sector, GDPA, decreased significantly during the post-reform period compared to the pre-reform period. Moreover, the increased agricultural production during the pre-reform era was primarily achieved in the 1980s due to HYV or Green Revolution technology. It is to be noted that the Green Revolution technology after late 1980s could not maintain steady growth of agriculture across the county and experienced declining GDPA. However, this decline in agriculture's share of the economy should not be perceived as negative, since the manufacturing and service sectors' contributions to the economy are rising. The portion of agriculture and allied sectors in the overall gross value added (GVA) of the country has been gradually decreasing due to the comparatively higher growth output of non-agricultural sectors outcome of the development phase. But the agricultural industry also plays a dominant position in the Indian economy. This fall in agriculture to GVA is offset by the rise in livestock income, which has become a significant secondary income source for millions of rural households. The Indian economy has seen a downward trend in income from agriculture and allied sectors and jobs created by this sector in both the pre-reform and post-reform periods. The very reason for this is the gradual transfer of rural labor to non-farm work, which means that income from agriculture and the allied sector is diminishing. The post-reform image shows more rural workers' participation in non-farm activities than was the case in the pre-reform era. There is necessity of schooling, skills development improved. Infrastructure, access to markets, access to credit in rural areas, and the liberalization of the Indian economy to be the primary factors responsible for the steady shift of rural labor to non-farm jobs. As a result, the NDP, originating in the agriculture and allied industries, witnessed a deteriorating trend. It should be noted, however, that the rural economy in general and agriculture in particular are critical to the Indian economy's overall growth and development goals. Farmer producers companies, FPOs, which cater to the needs of farmers, weavers, rural artisans, etc., help to raise their incomes, are essential players both in rural areas and in agriculture. There is an increasing need to raise their numbers. Farmers' profits can be increased and their exposure to economic risks reduced if producer firms are well-run and profitable. The authors examined the role of infrastructure in agricultural development. They concluded that the availability and usage of infrastructure had a positive and significant effect on agricultural development, i.e., agricultural productivity growth. This implies the need to establish an encouraging atmosphere for rural development. 3.4 Sectoral composition and employment. The labor force engaged in agriculture in India is immense and it includes all genders, male and female. However, agriculture has seen a steep decline in rural women's rate of participation in the workforce. As per Niti Aayog estimate in 2017, this displacement of women from agriculture was one of the critical reasons for the drop in agricultural labor between 2004-5 and 2011-12, which was the first to fall since 1970. Although the rural income from agricultural output, at least per capita, has increased. In reality, however, this does not mean that total revenue has increased, as this increase is attributed primarily to the removal of labor power from agriculture. It's worth noting that the number of agricultural employees does not match the income generated by the industry, resulting in a disparity between farm income and farm labor. The national output and employment share see the contribution of rural areas to India's economy from 1970-71 to 2011-12. The rural areas accounted for 84.1% of the overall population and accounted for 62.4% of the total net domestic product (NDP) in 1970-71. Subsequently, the rural share of national income fell sharply until 1999-2000. The rural share of total employment has also seen a fall, but its rate has not been balanced by shifts in the national production or revenue share. The diminishing contribution of rural areas to national output has been observed without a related decline in their share of jobs. This suggests that a substantial part of the country's total economic growth came from capital-intensive industries in urban areas without producing meaningful employment during the time under consideration. However, the gap between rural production and jobs rose from 22% in 1970-71 to 28% in 1999 to 2000. After 1999 to 2000, the rural economy's growth rate increased and hit the same level as the urban economy's growth rate. This led to a stabilization of about 48% of the overall NDP contribution to rural areas. The NDP's rural share decreased marginally between 2004-5 and 2011-12 amid an increase in the growth rate. On the other hand, the rural percentage of the overall population has gradually decreased from 76.1% in 1999 to 2000 to 70.9% in 2011 to 12. Due to a quicker reduction in the rural share of total jobs than in the national NDP, the gap between the rural share of production and employment decreased to 24% by 2011 to 12. This data indicates that the urban economy has overtaken the rural economy in terms of output, but urban employment accounts for less than half of rural jobs. This has profound implications, such as a wide disparity in workers' productivity between rural and urban areas. The sector-wise fragmentation reveals significant shifts in the contribution of rural areas to the national economy. The rural areas also attributed about one-third of non-farm output and 48.7% of non-farm employment. The contribution of the rural regions to various sectors of the non-farm economy has shown vast differences and curious trends. In the case of the manufacturing sector, the most striking change in the rural share was observed. Between 1970 to 71 and 2011 to 12, the percentage of rural areas in the manufacturing sector doubled and exceeded production in urban areas. In the year 2011 to 12, rural areas contributed 51.3% of manufacturing output. However, this sharp increase in rural output did not increase rural employment in the manufacturing sector. By contrast, the country's rural share of total manufacturing employment decreased by 4.1 percentage points over the 40 years ending in 2011 to 12. It is clear that the manufacturing sector has shifted to rural areas, but without a corresponding increase in employment during the same period. The proportion of rural areas in the construction sector increased by 5.5%, while the share of employment increased by 10.0%. In the services sector, rural areas were primarily lost to urban areas after 2004 to 2005 and accounted for 25.9% of the country's output of services in 2011 to 12. These changes show that rural employment has increased at a much quicker rate in comparatively low-paid construction activities. 3.5 Structural changes in output and employment in rural India. Growth rates in output and employment show large variations across sectors and over different periods, which help understand the country's rural economy transition. The sector-wise growth rate in NDP and employment over three subperiods was 1970-71 to 1993-94, pronounced as the pre-reform period. 1993-94 to 2004-2005, pronounced as the post-reform period, and 2004-5 to 2011-12, pronounced as the economic acceleration period, are presented in Table 1, and the sectoral composition is shown in Table 2, Table 1. Growth rates in rural NDP at 2004-5 prices and rural employment percent Look at the screen. Source: Changing Structure of Rural Economy of India, Implications for Employment and Growth. Discussion paper, Niti Aayog, between 1970 to 71 to 1993 to 94, the NDP's annual growth in the agriculture sector was 2.57% compared with a yearly increase of 5.70% in non-farm sectors, Table 1. As a result, the agricultural share in the rural NDP decreased from 72.4% to 57% between 1993 and 1994, Table 2. Between non-farm sectors, the manufacturing, construction, and services sectors witnessed 5.18%, 3.94%, and 6.10% annual growth. It raised their share of rural NDP by 2.2% and 10 percent points during the pre-reform period, respectively. The agricultural sector growth declines to 1.87% during the post-reform period, 1993 to 94 and 2004-05, whilst the non-farm economy's growth rates accelerate to 7.93%. The impact of the downturn in agriculture on the rural economy was offset by slightly higher growth in non-farm sectors, which increased the rate of change in the rural economy to more than 5% compared to 3.72% in the pre-reform period. These adjustments further reduced the agricultural share in the rural economy from 57% in 1993 to 94 to 39% in 2004. 05 Thus, by 2004 to 2005, the rural economy had been more non-agricultural than agricultural. The agricultural sector saw a rebound and a reported promising annual growth rate of 4.27% during 2004 to 2005 to 2011 to 2012. Likewise, non-farm sectors also experienced a growth of 9.21%. This time is known as the economic acceleration period because of the acceleration of agricultural and non-farm growth. During this time, average growth was 7.45% for the overall rural economy. It should be remembered that there was a slightly higher price rise relative to non-agricultural prices and expansion in agriculture and non-agricultural industries at current prices over the period 2004 to 5 to 2011 to 12. As a result, the agricultural sector's share in rural NDP at current prices did not slip further and maintained at a slightly higher level of 39.2% in 2011 to 12 over 2004 to 5. The services sector's growth declined to 3.48% after 2004 to 5, compared to 8.55% over the previous decade in the non-farm industries. On the other hand, there was substantial growth of 15.87% and 11.49% respectively between 2004 to 5 and 2011 to 12 in the manufacturing and constructions. Consequently, the share of the services sector dropped to 27.0% from 37.3%. In contrast, the percentage of the rural economy's manufacturing and construction sector rose from 11.4 to 18.4% and from 7.8% to 10.5%, respectively. Development trends in particular industries show a considerable diversification of the rural economy into non-farm sectors. From the point of view of economic growth, employment should demonstrate a parallel trend and pattern. Table 1 indicates that rural work and production have followed different directions of development. Rural employment showed an average growth rate of 2.16% during the pre-reform period, which slowed down to 1.45% in the post-reform period and became negative, -0.28%, during the economic acceleration period. However, the production growth rate in the same subperiods accelerated, the prime factor for weak growth accompanied by negative growth in rural employment is that the rural non-farm sector does not accommodate the labor force leaving agriculture. The facts revealed by Table 1 also suggest that employment elasticity in rural areas declined over time and became negative after 2004 to 5. Insensitivity to employment poses essential questions about the rural economy's capacity to provide viable opportunities for the increasing population and the labor force coming out of agriculture. Among non-farm sectors, there has been a decline in employment growth in the manufacturing and services sectors, but the construction sector has seen a sharp rise in employment growth over time. 3.6 Rural Physical Resources. Rural physical resources consisted of both renewable and non-renewable resources. Land is one of the most important resources which provides all necessities of our life, viz., food, clothing and housing accommodation. The other categories of physical resources are water resources, forest resources and energy resources. All these resources are discussed below. 3.6.1 Land resources. The land is a finite resource, the availability of which is set for all practical purposes. Around the same time, the demand for land for various conflicting uses continues to rise with increased human population and economic development. The nature of land use at any particular time is influenced by a variety of factors, including the magnitude of the human and livestock population, the level of demand, the technologies in use, the cultural practices, the position and power of the land, organizational factors such as the pattern of possession and rights and state control. In addition to having economic effects, land use practices often have significant ecological aspects, which, if overlooked, may have catastrophic consequences. Based on its use, the available land can be narrowly divided into two parts, viz. Agricultural land and non-agricultural land. Agricultural land is a land suitable for agricultural production, both for crops and livestock. It includes a net seed, field, current fallows, and land under a variety of tree crops and groves. In India, agricultural land is no more than 50% of the country's general geographical area. This is the highest among the world's large and medium-sized nations. Non-agricultural lands contains of the following: I. Land, underwood and permanent pastures; 2. Land for other non-agricultural purposes, towns, villages, highways, railways, etc. and 3. Land categorized as cultivable waste as well as sterile and uncultivated land in mountain and desert regions. The geographical, economic, and administrative structure implemented together defines the pattern of land use of a country at any given time. In other words, the present trend of land usage in different regions in India has developed as a result of the behavior and interaction of multiple variables taken together, such as the physical characteristics of the land, the composition of resources such as capital and labor available, and the position of the area about other dimensions of economic growth. 3.6.2 Water resources. India receives an average rainfall of 1,170 mm, 46 in per year, or about 4,000 cubic kilometers, 960 cumi of rain per year, or about 1,720 cubic meters, 61,000 cubic feet of fresh water per person per year. About 80% of its territory is hit by rainfall of 750 mm, 30 in or more per year. However, in time or geography, this rain is not uniform. Most precipitation falls during the monsoon season, June to September, with much more rainfall in the northeast and north than in India's west and south. India's vast region is under a tropical climate that is beneficial to agriculture throughout the year due to favorable warm and sunshine weather. Perennial water sources are sufficient to cater to the high rate of evapotranspiration from the cultivated soil. While the total water supplies are sufficient to satisfy all the region's needs, the differences in water supply due to the temporal and spatial availability of water resources must be bridged by the interlinking of rivers. Approximately 25% of the electricity produced in the economy comes from tidal sources. The other important application of water is irrigation. In a nation where agriculture provides livelihood to a significant chunk of the population, irrigation water supply can make a substantial difference, i.e., it can either boost or depress economic development. Significant sources of water can be divided into two categories. A. Surface water. Surface water is present in rivers, lakes, or other surfaces. Surface water is naturally replenished by precipitation and naturally lost by evaporation and subsurface runoff into the soil. Surface water is subject to various pollutants, such as agricultural waste, poisons, insecticides, toxic waste, algae, and many other biological materials. B. Groundwater. Groundwater is trapped under the ground. The rain that soaks into the land, the rivers that vanish under the soil, and the melting snow are just a handful of the springs that refresh the underground water source. Groundwater can contain any or all of the pollutants contained in surface water as well as the dissolved minerals it absorbs during its extended stay underground. Other reservoirs of water that have not yet been tapped but are a possible supply are salt lakes, salt pools, snow and ice fields. 3.6.3 Forest resources. In India, forests make up 23% of the total land area. The word forest is derived from the Latin word foris, meaning outside. Maybe the reference was to a village boundary or a fence dividing village and forest land. The forest is a natural, self-sustaining ecosystem defined by a vertical structure created by trees' presence. Trees are large, normally single-stemmed, woody trees. Forests can occur in several different areas under various circumstances, but all real forests share these physical characteristics. Since the forest is a natural community, there is no static forest in time. That is, since forest communities adapt to outside pressures, most forests are in a constant state of flux. Depending on the systems in which woodland communities reside, those factors can include rainfall, heat, wind, glaciation, seismic activities, floods, animal activity, insulation, and so on. At any moment, the forest is a series of previous reactions to external influences and internal competitive relationships. Consequently, the present state of any forest, indeed of any natural community, represents what has happened before. 3.6.4 Energy resources. Energy demand in rural areas is on the rise. India is the fourth largest producer of electricity in the world. Current energy consumption is primarily in the domestic cooking and illumination, agriculture, transport, and manufacturing industries. India's electricity basket has a combination of all available capital, including renewables. The primary source of energy is coal, followed by petroleum and conventional biomass. According to the 2011 census, household figures reveal that only 55.3% of rural households used electricity as the primary source of illumination. Energy access is the main challenge faced by the country in terms of energy, with about a quarter of its population missing access to power and protection. At the same time, imports constitute an essential amount of energy, incredibly crude petroleum. A broad gap in the trend of energy usage between the haves and have-nots, urban and rural, and men and women is also a matter of concern. Energy supply, connectivity, and cost-effectiveness are critical to sustaining our country's growth rate. India's per capita electricity consumption was accounted to be 10 kWh kWh in the year 2014 to 15. According to official statistics, the nation's total installed capacity was 298,059,97 MW as of 31st March 2016. Thermal power plants make up 70% of the existing capacity and about 14.35% of the installed capacity. There are 21 nuclear reactors in the world with a gross installed capacity of 5,780 megawatts. There is a large difference between rural and urban areas in the per capita energy usage pattern. For example, 75% of rural households rely on firewood, 10% on dung cake, and about 10% on LPG, compared with 22% of urban households, 10% on kerosene, and about 57% on LPG level of gas. For example, in the past decade, the cumulative registered domestic LPG ties rose exponentially from 106 million in 2008 to 9 to 263 million in 2017 to 18 in house lighting, while 44% of rural households rely on kerosene and 55% on electricity. 92% of urban households is electric and another 7% on kerosene. The Indian economy is continually rising, and all Indians are proud of this. And energy is the key resource for sustaining or accelerating this growth. It can be said that, regardless of their social and economic status and geographic position, access to a constant supply of adequate renewable energy is necessary for all-round growth. 3.7 Rural economy. In the current scenario, rural India has emerged as the salvation of the broken Indian economy. Everybody is betting on rising demand for consumption in rural areas to improve in the novel coronavirus disease, COVID-19 period. There are expectations that COVID-19 could be blessing in disguise for Indian indigenous industries. India can emerge as a potential alternative choice for cost-efficient and quality products. There are possibilities of large-scale foreign investments in the country in near future in the rural indigenous sector. Under the circumstances, more emphasis need to be given on self-sufficient reliant rural economy. The rural domestic sector needs to be strengthened considering the higher percentage of informal sector workers in the country. There are immense opportunities for in this context along with demographic dividend. So the expectation is that, finally, rural India, often viewed as a cause of trouble to the economy as a whole, will see the country's economic growth of 0%. The Indian economy is in recession, and hitting a 0% growth rate also means substantial economic growth. This is going to be a very cheerful piece of news. This paints a pink picture of the rural economy, which mainly involves agriculture and informal employment. About 97% of rural jobs are in these two segments. The initial rise in rural demand suggests an increase in wages. This is viewed as the first indicator of the economy on the way to recovery since the pandemic-induced lockdown and, in general, the decline of economic activity. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.